General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Friday, May 9, 2025. First, the meeting between Sasha and Willow was nothing short of intense. The air between them was thick with tension. Each woman carrying her own burdens and unresolved emotions. For Sasha, this was a confrontation long overdue. She had watched from the sidelines as Willow fell deeper into her relationship with Drew. A man she knew all too well was bad news. Drew had a reputation for deceit and manipulation, and Sasha couldn't fathom how Willow, someone she once thought had better judgment, could allow herself to be so entangled with him. It was as though Willow had thrown away everything she had worked for, ignoring all the red flags that Sasha had so clearly seen. The more she thought about it, the more infuriating it became, and the anger bubbled to the surface. Sasha's mind raced through all the things she wanted to say. All the hurt and confusion that had built up inside her over time. She was furious, not just with Drew but with Willow as well. The woman she had once called her friend seemed blind to everything around her, too consumed by the idea of love or affection that Drew had tricked her into believing was real. Sasha had seen the damage Drew had caused in the lives of others, how his actions had spiraled out of control, and she couldn't bear the thought of Willow becoming another victim of his games. It was as though Willow had lost her sense of self, choosing to ignore the truth in favor of something far more dangerous. At the same time, Sasha couldn't ignore the resentment that had built up inside her. She had tried to be understanding, to offer Willow support when she needed it most. But now it seemed like everything Sasha had done was in vain. It wasn't just the relationship with Drew that bothered her, it was the way Willow had become so defensive and closed off. Unwilling to see things from any other perspective but her own. The Willow that Sasha had known was strong, intelligent, and capable of making her own decisions. Yet now she seemed lost in a fog of misguided loyalty and emotional dependency. Willow, for her part, wasn't without her own frustrations. She, too, felt betrayed, but in a different way. She had grown tired of Sasha's constant judgment and criticism, tired of being reminded of her own mistakes. As much as Sasha's anger was directed at her relationship with Drew, Willow couldn't shake the feeling that Sasha had her own skeletons to deal with. Sasha's own past, with all its complications and mistakes, seemed just as murky as Willow's present. Willow couldn't help but feel the sting of Sasha's disapproval, and it only served to make her more defensive. The truth was, she didn't need Sasha's judgment. Not when she was already grappling with her own doubts and struggles. As Willow reflected on her own choices, she realized how little she had been able to rely on her friends in recent months. Sasha's criticisms felt like another weight she had to carry, another reminder that she wasn't living up to anyone's expectations. Yet, in her heart, Willow knew she was just trying to find something to hold on to. She was seeking validation, seeking love, and perhaps, in her desperation, she had latched on to Drew because he was offering something that she thought she needed, something that, in reality, was only leading her down a darker path. Despite the clear warning signs, she had convinced herself that there was something redeemable in him, something that justified staying in the relationship. Sasha, on the other hand, was becoming more and more disillusioned. She had tried to reach out, to offer guidance, but it felt like she was talking to a wall. Every attempt at helping Willow seemed to be met with resistance. The more Sasha tried, the further Willow seemed to pull away, as if Sasha's concerns only made things worse. It was painful for Sasha to see someone she had once cared for so deeply spiral out of control. She couldn't help but feel responsible in some way, as though she should have been able to help Willow see the truth before it was too late. But now, it seemed like the damage had already been done. And no amount of advice or intervention could reverse the course that Willow had set for herself. The encounter ended with neither woman walking away satisfied. Both were left with a sense of unresolved tension, their relationship fractured in ways they hadn't expected. Sasha left feeling heartbroken, disillusioned by the person Willow had become, while Willow was left alone with her own thoughts, questioning everything. Neither could shake the feeling that they had failed each other in some way. It wasn't just about Drew, it was about trust, loyalty, and the choices they had made along the way. The friendship they had once shared now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by their individual battles, leaving them both wondering if there was any way to fix what had been broken. Second, Lulu had once vowed to herself that she would never meddle again in the personal affairs of others, especially when it came to Brooklyn and the situation surrounding her teenage pregnancy with Dante. Despite numerous pleas from friends and family to stay out of it, and the deep disruptions that the event caused in everyone's lives, Lulu had always thought that stepping back was the best approach. She recognized the importance of respecting others' privacy, understanding that everyone has their own battles to fight, and that sometimes the most supportive action is simply not to interfere. Lulu had made peace with the chaos that had come from Brooklyn's past, believing that some things were better left unaddressed, even if they had deeply affected her. However, as time passed, Lulu found herself in a situation where she could no longer stand on the sidelines. Her concerns, once carefully bottled up, began to surface. The more she observed the lives of those around her, the more she felt compelled to get involved. This time, it was Ned. Despite her previous resolution to respect the boundaries of others, she felt an overwhelming need to challenge him. Lulu, once again, found herself questioning the choices and actions of the people closest to her. She believed that Ned's decisions were influencing things in ways that were too subtle to be ignored. And she couldn't help but feel an urge to speak up, to address what she felt was wrong. Ned, on the other hand, had grown weary of being questioned and scrutinized. His life, filled with its own set of challenges and responsibilities, had left him craving peace and privacy. The constant probing by Lulu felt invasive, especially considering that he had been dealing with his own difficult decisions. He was no longer the man who was eager to engage in long discussions about every aspect of his life, particularly when it came to matters that were intensely personal. Lulu's persistence in bringing up these sensitive issues seemed to chip away at the calm and control he had worked hard to maintain. He found himself frustrated and irritated, unable to understand why Lulu, of all people, couldn't just let things be. As the tension grew between them, it became increasingly clear that Lulu had crossed a line. In trying to help, she had done more harm than good. She had failed to recognize that her concern for others was sometimes pushing them away rather than offering the support she intended. Lulu's inability to let things rest highlighted her struggle with control, with wanting to make sense of everything around her, especially when it came to people she cared about. But in doing so, she had forgotten one of the most important lessons of all: respect for others' personal boundaries. In truth, Lulu's desire to intervene was not entirely without merit. She had always been a person who believed in righting wrongs, in fighting for justice where she saw it lacking. But her determination to fix every problem she saw around her clouded her judgment. She failed to see that sometimes, allowing people to work through their own issues, without external pressure, was the best way to help them grow and heal. Her concern, though genuine, became overwhelming, and in trying to control the situation, she had alienated those closest to her. Ned's frustration grew as he realized that Lulu wasn't just questioning him, she was questioning his ability to make decisions for himself. The more Lulu insisted on offering her opinions, the more Ned felt his autonomy slipping away. It was one thing to ask for help or guidance, but another entirely to have someone constantly challenge every decision you made. This lack of respect for his boundaries weighed heavily on Ned, who had always prided himself on making decisions for his own life. It was clear that Lulu needed to understand the importance of allowing others the space to handle their personal affairs without unsolicited interference. By the end of their interactions, both Lulu and Ned were left with a sense of unresolved tension. Lulu, despite her good intentions, had learned a painful lesson about respect and boundaries. She had once thought that her involvement in others' lives was an act of caring, but now she realized that it could be just as damaging as neglect. Ned, on the other hand, Was left feeling drained and resentful, unable to comprehend why Lulu couldn't simply accept that some things were better left untouched. In the end, the damage done to their relationship was not irreversible, but it had certainly altered the dynamics between them. Lulu had to face the difficult truth that sometimes the most supportive thing one can do is step back and allow others to live their lives on their own terms. Third, Sidwell's proposal came as a carefully calculated offer, one that seemed too tempting to refuse despite its underlying darkness. It wasn't explicitly stated that refusal would be impossible. But the way Sidwell presented it made it clear that turning him down would not only be unwise, but perhaps dangerous as well. He knew how to use leverage. How to present an offer so enticing that it became difficult for the recipient to resist. While he didn't make threats outright, there was a certain weight in his words. A suggestion that refusing him could lead to consequences that far outweighed the benefits of decline. The deal, like most deals with Sidwell, came with strings attached. But the rewards were enough to make anyone reconsider their position. Ava, who had always lived her life in the gray areas between right and wrong, found herself standing at a crossroads. She had worked with dangerous individuals before, but Sidwell's world was different. His reach extended far beyond the boundaries of the underworld, and his ambitions were greater than most. He was a man who saw people as pieces on a chessboard, moving them as he saw fit, discarding them when they no longer served his purposes. Yet, in a strange way, Ava could understand this. She had, in her own life, often made difficult decisions to secure her position, and the amount of money Sidwell was promising her was staggering. The promise of wealth and power stirred something deep within her, a desire she couldn't ignore. Despite the unease she felt at the prospect of working with someone like Sidwell, Ava knew that this could be the opportunity of a lifetime. He was offering her more than just money, he was offering her a chance to reshape her future. With his resources, she could finally secure the leverage she had long been chasing. She could use this as a stepping stone to gain control over her own life. To rid herself of the obstacles that had constantly stood in her way. The people on Sidwell's list, those who stood between him and his goals, were formidable opponents, but they were not invincible. Sunny, Jason, Drew, Sasha, each one was a player in a game of power and manipulation, and Sidwell was willing to remove them without hesitation. Ava understood that the game they were about to play was dangerous, but it was a game she had played before, and she knew the rules well enough to navigate it. However, even as the temptation to accept his offer grew, Ava found herself questioning the morality of her decision. She had always been someone who carefully weighed her choices, knowing that each action had consequences. Sidwell's plans were shrouded in darkness, and while the financial reward was undeniable, the cost could be higher than she was willing to pay. There was a part of her that hesitated, knowing that working with Sidwell would tie her to a world of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. It was a world where trust was a commodity that could be bought and sold, where allies were just as easily turned into enemies. Yet, the lure of security, of finally having the means to control her own destiny, made it difficult to resist. In the end, Ava made the decision to go forward with Sidwell's plan, albeit reluctantly. She understood the risks involved, but she also knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't afford to pass up. She had been in survival mode for so long that it felt almost natural to make this choice. The prospect of financial freedom, of finally breaking free from the constraints that had always held her back, outweighed her concerns. Sidwell's offer, though dangerous, represented a chance to rewrite her future. To take control in ways she hadn't thought possible. She knew she would be playing a dangerous game, but at least now, she would be on the winning side, armed with the resources to make her own rules. As Ava agreed to work with Sidwell, she knew that her involvement would not be without consequences. She was stepping into a world where alliances shifted like sand, where trust was a fleeting illusion, and where every decision could either solidify her position or bring about her downfall. But for Ava, the reward of power and control was too great to ignore. She was no stranger to making difficult decisions, and this was simply another step in her long journey of navigating a world filled with shadows and secrets. While she might not have been fully comfortable with the choices she was making, she knew that in this game, only the strong and the strategic would survive. Sidwell, meanwhile, had found the perfect partner in Ava. He had known that she was someone who could be both an asset and a liability, someone who could play the game with the same ruthlessness that he did. She wasn't naive, she knew the stakes, and that made her an ideal ally. With Ava by his side, Sidwell could now move forward with his plans. Confident that she would be both an effective player and a formidable adversary to anyone who stood in their way. Ava might have hesitated, but now, there was no turning back. She had crossed the line, and with it came a new reality, one where loyalty and betrayal were not defined by friendship, but by power and survival. Finally, Tracy had been there before. She had been through the highs and lows of business warfare, personal betrayals, and the cutthroat politics of Port Charles. She knew how to play the game. How to manipulate situations to her advantage, and how to keep her emotions in check when everything around her was falling apart. Tracy had seen it all, schemes, plots, and backstabbing that could make anyone lose faith in the idea of loyalty or friendship. So, when she heard about the plan to take down Sunny, she couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. It wasn't that she doubted the plan's potential, but in her years of experience, she had learned that nothing ever went as smoothly as expected in Port Charles. Tracy had anticipated a certain outcome when she finally met with Urza. She expected to hear about a calculated move. A strategy so carefully crafted that Sunny would have no chance of escaping the trap. But what she received instead was a series of shocking revelations that threw her off balance. Urza had provided information that was not only unexpected but also disconcerting. There were details about their plan that Tracy hadn't anticipated, loopholes, miscalculations, and a sense that their position was far weaker than she had originally thought. Tracy, who had always prided herself on her ability to foresee every possible outcome, found herself staring at a new reality where control was slipping from her grasp. The more Tracy listened, the more it became apparent that the plan to dethrone Sunny was faltering. What she had thought was a well-organized, foolproof plan was now looking more like a house of cards ready to collapse. Urza, despite his confidence, seemed to have underestimated the intricacies of Sunny's operation. Tracy had expected some level of resistance, but this was beyond her imagination. The people they were up against were not only powerful but cunning, and Sunny, in particular, had managed to outsmart them at every turn. It was clear now that the game had changed. And the stakes were much higher than Tracy had ever anticipated. Tracy's frustration mounted as she processed the information. She had been involved in enough schemes to know when something wasn't going according to plan, and the signs were all there. What had started as a promising opportunity to finally rid Port Charles of Sunny's influence was slowly unraveling. The pieces weren't falling into place as they should, and Tracy, who had always been in control of every situation, now found herself caught in a web of uncertainty. She had trusted Urza, believed in his ability to carry out the plan with precision, but now she was questioning his competence. The cracks were starting to show, and the reality of their failure was sinking in. Despite her initial shock and disappointment, Tracy's mind began to work quickly. She wasn't one to back down easily, and she certainly wasn't about to let this failure define her. She had learned long ago that setbacks were just part of the game. And the real challenge was in how you responded to them. Tracy had faced far worse in her career and come out on top, so while the news about their plan's failure stung, she wasn't about to let it derail her. She knew there were always other options, other strategies to pursue, and she wasn't ready to give up on the goal of taking Sunny down just yet. As she sat there, listening to Urza explain the full scope of the complications, Tracy's mind was already racing ahead, calculating the next move. There was always another way. Always a path to follow, even if it required a shift in tactics. Tracy's resilience was one of her strongest assets, and she was determined not to let this setback be the end of her pursuit. She had seen far too many failures turn into victories to let this one defeat her. The game was far from over, and Tracy knew better than anyone that when it came to taking down someone like Sunny, it was never a matter of whether you would fail, it was a matter of how you would rise from it. Tracy had once again found herself at a crossroads. But she knew that her next move would be calculated and ruthless. This time, she wouldn't make the same mistake of underestimating Sunny or his allies. The stakes were higher. The players were more dangerous, and the plan was evolving, but Tracy was ready. If anything, the failure only fueled her desire for victory. And in Port Charles, where nothing was ever as it seemed, Tracy knew that she could always count on one thing, her ability to adapt, evolve, and fight until the very end.